Thank you, Nicholas, for being with us today. I've used you as a resource over and over throughout the years, and you're always there to give great advice and work with clients. And so I wanted to kind of bring you on here to chat a little bit more about your industry, being an architect, what you do in the industry, and kind of the different projects that you're seeing, different trends you're seeing, and just overall connect. So thank you for being here. I'll let you take it away. I think you have a little presentation for us.
All right. So what I went over with you and your team before, basically, questions about whether or not clients should tear down or build a new home. We are an architecture firm. We do everything from ground up construction to renovations, interior design. We'll help with selecting finishes, furniture, basically the whole thing. And a lot of times clients come into this either wanting to do the tear down or wanting to do the renovation. And we found there are a bunch of factors to consider. Basically, this is a very straightforward, unadorned presentation, but it gives useful information, we think. When you tear a house down, you're basically tearing it down. Sometimes you can leave a foundation, but the idea is that it's all gone. There's cost factors. You're essentially, buying a home, tearing it down, building a new home. So some things to consider. There are time factors involved. If you buy a home and you tear it down, you have to live somewhere else while the new home is being built. So, that adds extra cost. Our design process involved in whether it's a tear down or renovation are not that different. They're typically 6 or 7 months. And then, construction can take a little bit longer sometimes for renovation versus a tear down based on like unknown conditions that you might come up with, that kind of thing. So with renovation, basically you're picking away at an existing home. You're going to maybe do partial demolition, or you're going to, gut it all the way. But there are a number of things to consider. Sometimes people will buy a home because they love it so much and they just want to improve the quality. So you might want to upgrade the windows, the finishes, some interior layouts. A lot of times bathrooms and kitchens come into play there. The considerations are wide and in between. Sometimes we help clients before they actually buy a home. So we'll work with someone like you, actually, to help owners assess whether or not they can do a renovation and increase the space or change the space to what their ideals are, or look for some possible opportunities versus tearing it down. So the process basically involves evaluation. It's useful to get a home inspection, and it's also useful these days to get a home energy audit.
That is coming up a lot more and more.
To find out, I'm sorry.
The energy, the energy audit.
Yeah. So what that does is it gives you, they can do like a blower door test, all of these things to help see, and then a thermal imaging to help see where there's no insulation or where insulation is needed, how airtight the home is. That's a big factor in how we design homes now, new homes, and it can be done to existing homes. So basically the airtightness improves the overall performance, coupled with insulation.
Gotcha.
So, yeah. And then, the way we work, we love to get in early, obviously, but we do think it's actually useful. So getting into a home or an existing site or something like that can help an owner visualize some things that they may not be used to visualizing. It's what we're trained to do. We can look for opportunities people may not have seen. And we can do things like identify like red flags. In a place like Seattle, where you've got slopes, you've got potential slide zones, you've got liquefaction zones. There are a whole bunch of factors that may make it more difficult, for example, to build a new home on or by replacing the old home, and because a site has so many limitations. So we can actually provide some of that feedback early on before we're even hired to design anything. But the way we work is, according to some fairly traditional phases, what we call project delivery.
Mm-hmm.
So schematic design is the early stages where we develop concepts, and it's like everything you want to see. That gets refined after some comments. Typically, we like to have a general contractor on board after
Mm-hmm.
that phase. What they do is they will be part of a team, essentially, and can offer really good input, as well as some rough order of magnitude kind of pricing. And
Yep.
that helps us understand whether or not we're meeting the owner's budget,
Mm-hmm.
goals, and things like that. So the design gets refined. We do design development, where we start focusing a little bit more on some of the smaller details, making any changes. And then it gets priced again. And
Mhm.
then we keep refining until we do construction documents, which ends up being ultimately part of your agreement with the general contractor. So the general contractor will sign an agreement with the owner based on the construction document, the contract documents.
Mhm.
At some point between design development and construction documents, we're also applying for building permits, which in Seattle can sometimes take, some time. And
Yeah.
depending on, whether or not there are ECAs, so environmentally critical areas, that can be a little bit longer. If we have to work with a lot of consultants like geotechnical engineers, structural engineers, other consultants, like all of this can add to sort of a complexity and a length of time to a project. Once construction does start, we are there to provide what's called construction administration. And we have weekly site visits. We don't make any changes, but we make sure that the contractor is essentially doing the work that they said they would do. Sometimes as you get into things like with renovations, a lot of clients sometimes see other things that they may not have seen while we're in the
Details.
design process, and
Yeah.
details,
There's
exactly.
always those things that creep up after the fact.
Yeah, and there's this thing that we call in our industry unforeseen conditions. So it's like what's behind a wall that you assumed was there or that you had
Yeah.
no way to know was there all of a sudden appears. So it could be everything from like, there's supposed to be a post there holding up a roof, but there isn't, which is, happens. And so those kinds of things are addressed as we move through the construction process. So that's how we like to work, at least.
Yeah.
So this is a screenshot here of, new construction versus gut rehab. And just for those of you who do not know, gut rehab is essentially taking the building and completely gutting it and then building it back from the inside out, sometimes adding little additions or things like that. But you're essentially reconditioning an existing home, which we like typically. You end up conserving embodied energy from materials that have already been used to build the home, that kind of thing. So, so what's involved in permitting? Without getting into too much detail here, I'm just going to, there's a lot here, but basically, we help identify the red flags. We help the client submit documents to the city, set up any appointments that might be necessary. If we have to have coaching, if there's some very complicated portion of a project that that needs more input or collaboration with someone at the city to define and come up with a consensus on, we assist with all of those kinds of things. And there are ways that you can actually accelerate the building permitting process with the city. They have some priority green programs. It's called Priority Green, Green Building Standards. There's some other incentives that the city has developed in order to promote building green and building, more with more resiliency, basically. So those things tend to put you ahead of the
line.
Ahead of the line, and they run it through a little bit faster. So, there's one other path, and this is where you can still do a substantial amount of work to your home, but not go through a formal building permit process, and that's called a subject to field inspection. That can be everything from reversing a stair to some structural work, bathrooms, kitchens, those kinds of things. They give you an approval, and then the contractors that work on parts of the project pull individual permits. So typically for like plumbing, electrical, mechanical. So you're not doing anything like putting in windows, new insulation, things like that. You're just basically working largely within the shell. There's some exterior things you can do, but if you come up with a good strategy for the city with clear information, we found that they're willing to go the extra mile to help you do something that's a little bit faster. So it also decreases the burden on their stack of permitting projects that they have. So
They probably like clean paperwork, and that if you provide clean paperwork and all your details, then you're more likely to push through the system faster.
We really believe that that is the case. So we've had good experiences with making sure that we've got the right consultants, like the structural engineers, done all their calculations, done any detailed drawings. So it's very clear for a permit technician to just see how the project needs to be permitted, and that all the sort of, we cross all of our T's, dotted all of our I's. And that's, we pride ourselves in the completeness of our drawings typically. And we found that it's worked out well.
Yeah.
So.
I know one time when we had talked before, there's a kind of a timeline of which the city examines new permits or new construction permits. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, can you clarify just a little bit?
So it was when they're the design, maybe it's the design review, but it's like, I think you'd mentioned like October, or they do it every like 6 months or something like that. Was there a timeline to when they review certain permits? No, they're always
going.
Got
Yeah.
it. Okay.
Yeah. And, understanding when to start the process is really useful. So, if you have to get them to come out to do what's called a preliminary site evaluation, to make sure that all the things that you're showing on like the site plan for the work is actually how it is. They also look at any conditions that that maybe need to be addressed. But if you can get that started fairly quickly, identify all the components of your project, that starts the ball rolling a little bit faster as well.
Are there seasonal time things you need to take in consideration?
Yes, from the end of October to April, there's a limit on sort of like, ground work that affects the removal of soil and things like that. You can do work during this period, but they will require a ton of monitoring, and that's extra expenses to make sure that you're not, letting soil run down the street drains and things like that. Or
prime building season, I guess, would be May through September.
Yeah, get started basically in May with your foundation work and stuff like that, and then you're pretty good to go. You can keep rolling.
So you should then plan for permits and start this process basically in that October, November timeframe prior? Okay,
Yep.
so I think that's what maybe we had talked
That's
about, just
right,
planning
right.
the projects
Yeah.
correctly.
Got it.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. So we have a little example here of basically partial teardown or tear down really, and we'll show a house where we did sort of a gut rehab. But with this project, we were on a steep slope, potential slide area, all of the things that you could have piled on. Obviously, the building had the original house from 1940 was in a beautiful location, great views. We worked with the owners to try to fit their program into it and couldn't really get the existing home to work. So we took everything down to the foundation. And the key there was working with our structural engineer, keeping the foundation allowed us to not have to essentially reconstitute that side of the hill. We estimated it saved probably about $250,000 worth of work on this project. With the structural engineer, we were able to put pin piles, reinforced foundation where we needed to carry any additional loads. So, but essentially, there's a sort of before photo here, and then below it is the after. The owners are willing to concede on a few things and ultimately have exactly the kind of home that they want. But this is an example of a tear down. And then,
did they buy this property before you did it, or did they do a kind of an extensive feasibility on it?
they actually bought it, and they thought that they could make something out of this. Like, we were looking at removing the roof and using the existing walls to create something else. The problem was that the lower level, which opened to a view, had like 7-foot ceilings, and it really limited our ability, their ability to see, like, well, that's essentially unusable space. So by taking everything down, we were able to create 8.5-foot ceilings down there, all of this other stuff. Yeah. This is a recently completed home where the owners bought the house because they love the house. It's a very unusual house, built probably around 1980, but it had some really funky things going. Like, the exterior is funky but cool, but the interior was really funky and not cool. And so we took a lot of stuff out, but worked with a lot of features basically within the home and accentuated some of them. So the house is pretty vertical, so we actually opened up more areas that connected upper floors, lower floors, so you could hear, like, the kids' bedrooms ended up downstairs, the master bedroom on the 3rd floor, so that they could kind of keep tabs on what's going on in the house and improve the flow. While doing this, we basically, worked with the envelope. We kept a lot of the exterior finishes, but we put in all new windows, created a small addition so that a better view to Lake Washington, and insulated this. This house was also an example where, unforeseen conditions came up. So the people who were experimenting with this house, like, took had a long leash on that. And so there were, places where posts should have been and weren't, so typical areas you'd expect it. So it took a little bit more work, but working with our structural engineer, the contractor, we were able to work things out. And then there was a hot tub platform that was not desirable, let's put it that way. And so we built a studio at the end of their deck. So it ended up meeting all of the requirements: better bedrooms, better flow through the house, and way better energy performance. We kept the existing heat pump and rezoned the house so that we could circulate and condition the house better and more efficiently as well.
Nice. And it looks like maybe you took off a sunroom or whatever that upper picture is.
That little glass cover.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was like a glass greenhouse cover over the kitchen. It was just plate glass, not insulated. So it was cool, but like spectacularly inefficient. And we removed it, and we just extended that portion up. That was the only area.
Oh, I see. So you extended
Yeah,
the whole entire thing out. Oh,
exactly.
interesting.
Yeah, that was actually, given the location of this house on the site, it was the only place that we could add
Yeah.
on to the home.
Yeah.
We also extended out the entrance so that there was a canopy above the entryway and things.
Got it.
Mhm.
Very cool.
Yeah. So, we're big proponents of building efficiently and actually building to a better standard. The building codes are going in that direction. There are a lot of resources out there. I mentioned earlier, the city of Seattle is even incentivizing this. And as we look around, and energy costs just will keep going up. One of the really good ways to tackle existing and new buildings is by building into a standard that probably 10 years from now, like 5 years from now, all the building codes will essentially have, which is like a passive house type of construction. And
Can you define passive house?
yeah, so passive house is, in a nutshell, it's like you're super insulating a home so that you reduce by a large margin the energy consumption. So it doesn't mean that you can't open windows and doors or anything like that, but it does mean that by being super insulated, your energy use is low, your airflow, the sort of the clean air intake and exhaust throughout the house is filtered. So you have a very clean home. You have a very, very resilient home. So it's sort of like built to last a long time. And these are qualities that used to be the standard. We kind of went away from that a little bit because we could air condition things cheaply and heat them cheaply. But now that that's changing, we're kind of coming back, and through the use of building science and modeling, we understand that there are qualities in homes that we can improve to make them more resilient and lasting for the coming future. So
yeah. Or there's things also in the outside environment you don't necessarily want in your interior of your home too.
right. And so all the air, when the windows and doors are all closed, all the air that comes into the house, which is mechanically supplied, is filtered to a high degree. So it's one of the cleanest environments you can actually build. So
what is the difference between passive and net zero?
Net zero, passive house, by the way, gets you very close to making a home net zero. It's just one next step. Net zero essentially means that the performance of the house is self-sufficient, that you are using a lot of materials that have a reduced or low impact on CO2 emissions. And the passive house net zero program basically allows for, you can add solar panels to a home.
Got it.
So
basically all the energy, everything, it's net zero, being it's not creating any more energy that the house isn't consuming or
exactly.
okay.
Yeah.
And then materials, as far as what you see, I mean, is it timber? Is it steel? What are the
combination, depending on the house and the structure itself. Using lumber is a pretty good way to go these days, because it comes from largely sustainable and replenishable resources. Steel, concrete use a lot of energy in the manufacturing process, and they deplete resources. So wood is a good way to go.
Yep.
There are a lot of insulation materials coming out that are more eco-friendly as well. So.
Mhm. And is there, if you just baseline, let's say a green build, what is it? Just for those who don't know, what is that?
What is a baseline?
Yeah, baseline for a green built home.
So it would be the, really good insulation.
Mhm.
It would be airtight. So meaning when they do a blower door test, there's no air leakage, which is the biggest way that we lose efficiency in homes. You have high performance windows, and they're not like on a north wall, for example. They're more on the south wall where the sunlight can passively assist in heating the home. So Energy Star appliances, those things combined largely give you a good baseline.
Yep. And I imagine light fixtures too.
All the light fixtures, and and a reduction in the amount of light fixtures. Controlling things like vampire loads, like your chargers, things like that. Those are all strategies that can help you achieve a better baseline, to say, for performance.
Is there anything in that design process? And actually, let's open it up to maybe the net zero or more of the passive homes that is always, I guess, the kind of the bigger discussion of how just is it the heating? Is it more of the finish quality? Is it the roof, the structure? What is the biggest?
Are we talking costs impact?
Yeah, I think costs.
Yeah. So it's during the construction process. Building something like a passive house requires a few additional steps and a little bit more material, like insulation, for example. The additional steps are, making sure all the seams are taped. So when you have your plywood sheathing and things like that, that all of it is very carefully controlled, so that you don't let the air basically come in. In terms of foundations and things like that, we put a fair amount of insulation underneath the slabs, because the slabs draw the heat down into the ground, and it's a dissipating effect. So, mostly it's in the construction, the appliances, the interior finishes, those kinds of things are all pretty much like you might have in any kind of home. And as far as the exterior finishes, it's just in the way that they're installed. So they're installed over a much better controlled envelope in general. The windows and doors add a little bit of cost. Yeah.
Got it. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Anything else we want to touch on those? I know that, we've had an offline discussion about, building standards and how I guess I view just building in general. It's always good to use high quality materials, obviously keeping energy use in mind, because you're not building now for now, you're building now for the future. And, we all know when you walk into a house that's, 100 to 120 years old, or even older, you always say, oh, this house has great bones, right? Like,
Right.
because of the materials that were used and are still there in place today, with a little maintenance probably. But that is really what we should all be aspiring to build, because the alternative is building things that are plastic that, or, plastic fill board, all those things that end up ultimately in, either coming to the ground or ends in the landfill. So
Yeah. It's a little bit like, to us, it's important to look at a home not as like a product in the way that we view products these days. It's something that can be torn down and rebuilt. Like, that's very wasteful. Home is a place where you have a family, or you live. It's kind of like
sanctuary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so treating that in a way that is friendly to you, friendly to the environment makes a lot of sense. And so with that in mind, when you're building, building something that's resilient, building something that's long lasting, to us seems like it's important. We have this feeling that if you do build to a better standard, so something like passive house or very close to passive house, that you will have a house that's as efficient as it needs to be, 5, 10, 15 years out and beyond. So, investing a little bit more now, in order to build something that does stand the test of time, seems like a good value. We work with houses that were built, you had mentioned earlier, up until like the 60s or 70s, around there. Like houses were built pretty well. Like, we recently did a renovation in Bellevue where there's a house that was built in 59. And when you walk through it and you look at how the architect designed, where the living room is, where the dining room is relative to other spaces and the site itself, it's really impressive, because the way the sun tracks through the house and to the types of uses is meaningful and useful. And we were able to capitalize on it in the design that we did in the renovation. But building to those qualities makes a lot of sense and gets you a long way to a well-performing home.
Yeah, versus just maybe the 70s or 80s, maybe even some 90s construction where non-sustainable materials being used, the houses are falling apart, those different elements of, where it sits on the lot, the orientation, all that stuff is kind of out the door. So, I mean, we see plenty of that too. And it's really actually hard to remodel those homes. And you like, what do I even do? And it's no, you scrape it and you build something new, because putting the money to salvaging something like this makes zero sense.
Right. It makes the house more like a product. It's like this thing that just appeared and doesn't last. So, there's no heart, there's no soul. And the purpose seems fleeting. And so I think the attitude is hopefully shifting more, where people realize that there's a value to.
The argument to that would be that, affordable housing, and you have to kind of make everything fit. But I also think that it still translates to be building to the future, because even though you're saving the money now, you're going to be spending that money, later on rehabbing or, rebuilding or doing whatever. So it's almost like even though it does cost more now, depending on even whatever price range you're in, you don't have to be in an uber luxury home to spend a little extra to get the benefit on the end, for the lower range homes too.
Yeah, and there's there's something that you mentioned, when you're building affordable housing or even new housing, the tendency has been to build huge, because we think we need all this space. But if you take the time to think about what spaces you really need, and you can make a house less big, for example, and you have more green space around you, or with affordable housing, you pare things down to the basic minimal qualities that somebody needs to, or a family needs to live comfortably. You can really scale things down, and that cost realization becomes a value in itself when it's well done. So.
Nope, and that's true. And that again is life choices and we live in 950 square feet, right? And we just did a remodel on our place, and really just got rid of a whole bunch of stuff, like going almost like minimalism, making better use of the space that we're living in, because we are getting rid of things that just don't matter, that are more maybe not materialistic, but just stuff, right? You don't need. And when you declutter like that, you kind of learn, wow, this space is large. This feels like larger. I can't believe how much extra space you have. So it's keeping those things in mind too.
Absolutely. And, there are things that when you do that kind of thing, when you do that kind of like remodeling or renovation, you know, if you have the opportunity to change out one or two windows to allow better light, for example, all of a sudden a room feels different.
Yep.
There are things that can be done that don't mean you have to completely tear it down or do a full gut rehab, but small gestures can take places a long way, and increase the quality of the interior environments. Lighting does a great job in that regard as well.
Mm-hmm. Skylights too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep.
Not as efficient always, but yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
I'll keep that in mind.
totally.
Yeah, good. So what are these designations, I guess, that agents could look into?
So the National Association of Realtors has a green designation. And so I believe it's like both of these have some kind of certification attachment to it. So you go through some basic training and you understand what a green building is basically as a realtor, so that you can talk to your clients about it. The Earth Advantage program, from what we can tell, actually is working to make a case for establishing a value, meaning that it becomes down the line, hopefully, like we personally would like to think here as well, that if you do build to a higher standard or a more resilient standard, that the inherent value in the house, in the short term and the long term, is greater than a house that's built next to it that takes none of those things into consideration. So that we're very hopeful for programs like this. Below that, we have what we work with, passive house standards, so that I mentioned before.
Mhm.
It's more for the design side, and it's not the only green building standard that's out there, but we think it's the most useful one.
Got it. So when, let's say the Earth Advantage, so are they looking to make certifications on certain properties with their name that are up to this certain code? Is
Yeah,
that what they're trying to do? Okay, gotcha.
they have like an evaluator program, and so it does like a like a home inspection, but all the green qualities.
Got it.
So
So in theory, is there any other inspections? Because in theory, if you're buying a home that's maybe a green or, passive or whatnot, and you're a buyer and that's being marketed, I don't think a lot of the times that buyers recognize the name,
right.
but wouldn't think of hiring a secondary inspector to maybe come out and see exactly, the ins and outs of that.
Yeah.
I'm assuming those people exist. Is it through any of these programs, or what is?
Through these, there are independent inspectors as well that are doing this kind of stuff. And, as things get documented with like the city and stuff like that, in the future, being able to find out to what standard a home was built will become much more accessible to people. So they can easily look up building permit histories with the building department, things like that. There may not be a plaque on the building itself, but that information will be there for that property, and that'll give people a very quick understanding of what the value is or what the house's standards are.
Yeah, very cool.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really think about it in that way, but I think that that's definitely a good way of looking at it. And for buyers who are out there, like I said, looking at homes that are being advertised or marketed or built as green homes should definitely do their due diligence.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, I think we pretty much touched on everything we had on our little agenda today.
Okay.
Thank you always for being such a great resource for all clients. And I know I recently had a listing also that came up that you provided a whole workup on, in terms of what can be allowed and used on that space. And I think you're a great resource for agents, because you could do that quickly and provided renderings and just general advice. So again, I thank you for your time and everything that you've done for me in the past. So You're the best.
Likewise, Ashley.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, thank you. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we'll be in touch.
Sounds good. Thank you
All
very
right.
much.